I'm so thrilled to have this many people come to this kind of a forum. We may get a few more people showing up along the way. And um, Janice and Loretta and I have gone back and forth a little bit about how to do this and help us create the opportunity to have a conversation in addition to pass on some information to you all. So what we ultimately decided to do was to use some slides as a reference and start with that. And then that should take maybe half an hour to run through that stuff. If you have questions that come up during the slides, feel free to put them into chat. It's probably easier to do it that way than to try to figure out if somebody is asking a question while we're showing slides. So if you could do that, that would be great. And then the second half, what we'd like to do is have all of you introduce yourselves and tell us about why you're here and what experience brings you to this. So I'm going to go ahead and do something really snazzy and share my screen so that we can get started with the slides. So is everybody seeing the
Yes.
Yep. Slides? Okay, and we'll get them into even a more fancy mode. We're going to talk about the Washington Death with Dignity law and End of Life Washington, which is the organization which has worked to support people who wish to use the law. And it's not a model that's used across the board in every state, but it's used in our state. The three of us who are going to deal with the slideshow are all volunteers for End of Life Washington. And this is what we hope to cover today. We're going to talk, each of the three of us are going to introduce who we are and what our relationship to End of Life Washington is and why we do this work. We'll ask you about you at the end of the slideshow. We're going to cover a little bit about the history of Death with Dignity and what's happening nationally. Then review the information about Washington, how the law works, who the law doesn't work for, and that's a really important part of what's going on in the state at the moment. And introduce Voluntarily Stopping Eating and Drinking Initiative, which is an opportunity for more people to have more control over this part of their life and their death. We're going to talk about how you talk with your doctor and partner and family about these issues, a little bit about advanced care planning, and then invite you all to join us in this work if there's anybody who's interested in doing that. I'm going to start with who I am, and then Janice and Loretta and Raleigh can say a word about who they are. I am a internist by trade, a primary care adult doctor. I worked in Maine most of my adult life and worked in a hospice and with older people. So that ends up being a form of palliative care. My mother really introduced me to Death with Dignity when she was always very concerned about having control over the end of her life. She developed dementia and it really wasn't an option for her, but she ended up really using voluntarily stopping eating and drinking as her way of exiting the world. And that was a beautiful and important time for me. When I came to Washington, I got involved with the Lookout Coalition, and one of my early clients was a person who I had enormous respect for. She worked across the mountains a lot and would come over here for as her real home. She had a disease called pulmonary fibrosis that was killing her, and she was taking some experimental medication, and it came to the point that crossing the mountains was agonizing. She would get short of breath every time she got in her truck and hit the passes. She was cared for by her partner, and had a horrible time dealing with healthcare in Seattle. They were terrible communicators, and she and I worked on developing questions about prognosis and what to expect, and had a really difficult time having meaningful conversations about that. But she really became, she was very much a person who was in charge of her own life. She liked to hunt and fish, and didn't like being dependent and being cared for. And she got more and more disabled and got on hospice, and then made it clear that she was interested with using the Death with Dignity law. So when she had a time where she lost control of her bladder and bowels, and it was devastating to her. It was a loss of dignity that she really did not want to live with. So she said it was time, and her partner supported her. Her son came to be with her. Her best friend came to be at her side. And in the middle of her living room, after telling stories and holding one another, she took the medication and had a very gentle and peaceful death that for her turned out to be quite quick. And it was, we talked some about what they wanted to do after her death, and they organized things, did not have an extended amount of time with her at home. But all in all, I think it was the right thing for her, and it felt really like sacred work to be able to be with her through that process. So that's why I do it. And I'll turn it over to Janice, is the one I see. So why don't I give it to you, Janice?
Okay. My name is Janice Hickey. I am a retired clinical social worker, had my practice, private practice in Seattle, and now sort of split my time between Valley and Seattle. And I got to end of life I got a terminal diagnosis about 3.5 years ago. And though I had always been a fan and a supporter of Death with Dignity, it was always obviously from afar. I'd write the check and think this is a good cause. It obviously had more immediate meaning to me, and I started talking to people and reading and getting quite ready to use it. And a miracle happened. My diagnosis got upgraded, and so now I live with a terminal chronic disease, but I am not dying, no more than anybody else. But I really wanted, it felt like it was such a miracle. There's really no medical explanation for why things changed so much for me. And so I wanted to pay back the miracle, and I thought, well, what a better place to do that than end of life. And that's how I got here. And I just absolutely love it. Sometimes I don't love the details of the paperwork and stuff, but the work with the clients and the team is just fantastic. So it's nice to be here today.
Loretta?
I'm Loretta Bell. I think I just unmuted myself. I am a retired critical care nurse, which might just pretty much be all you need to know about why I do this work. I came to learn about this organization through a brief stint with the Lookout Coalition shortly after we moved to the Valley full time to retire. It was no accident we did know this was a death with dignity state. We chose to retire here partially because of that, knowing that at some point we at least wanted, my husband and I wanted to know that that was a possibility. So when reflecting on why I do this work, of course, it's more than my background in nursing. My absolute beloved grandmother died a horrible death when I was 7 years old. That was in the 60s. It was before there was such a thing as hospice care and comfort care in this country. I was present for some of it. I was in my 20s and 30s, and during the height of the AIDS crisis, I was a professional modern dancer, and my community was wiped out. And this was long before I became a nurse. My favorite story about a friend of mine in Washington, and this is pre-2008, when the law became, when Death with Dignity, the law was passed. He knew he was dying of AIDS, and he orchestrated his own death. And everybody, he was a very popular guy, and he wanted a party. And that party lasted for about 3 days. Nobody knew it was going to go on that long. He wanted a disco ball above his hospital bed, which we did. We managed to find a disco ball and put it above his hospital bed. And, you know, I don't know how to explain that experience. He wanted loud, blaring music. We provided that. He wanted, he was very well planned. He wanted to be cremated, and then he had contracted with a jeweler to make jewelry out of the bits of him, and to be distributed among certain of those people who had the guts to wear pieces of Vince. And so there was a great deal of humor and love and choice in that death. And I was amazed at how somebody could orchestrate a passing that was beautiful in the face of suffering. And then to fast forward to my life as a critical care RN, I saw absolutely the opposite so many times. And so this feels like an opportunity to change that experience, to be involved in that sacred work, to change that experience for anybody who we can help who is interested. And that's why I'm here. And I'm so honored to be in the presence of all of the volunteers I have the gift of working with.
Raleigh, do you want to say anything?
So I'm Raleigh Bowden. I'm trained as a pediatric oncologist initially in my life, and I think it's fair to say that I've been accompanying kids and adults on this death journey for 40 years, really, before the law, in a different kind of way. I've always been really interested in empowering people to make the choices that they want that are best for them. And I really am very passionate about end of life work. When I came to the Valley 10 years ago, I helped start the Lookout Coalition, which several of you have mentioned. And then Betsy and I both became trained as End of Life Washington volunteers. Really, I don't know, a few years into my living here, and actively did that work. And then sometime during that period, I became the End of Life Washington medical director for Eastern Washington to try to help expand access to recruit more pharmacists and prescribing physicians, and to mentor really new volunteers in the Tri-Cities and Spokane and other parts of Eastern Washington that have much poor access than we have in the Methow Valley. I am no longer an active volunteer with End of Life Washington because my interests have moved more into the palliative care world. But I continue with the Lookout Coalition, and I probably get a call a month from somebody that's interested in exploring the Death with Dignity law, which I am happy to refer on to these able volunteers that are currently in the Valley. I strongly believe that End of Life Washington is a critical partner in this work, and I always encourage patients both to get involved and let them help with the paperwork and so forth. And also I encourage them to get involved with hospice as another support system on this journey. So that's my story. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the Death with Dignity law itself and the, what's happening nationally. The first Death with Dignity law in the country was in Oregon, and it followed a citizens initiative in 1994 that went through a lot of controversy. And it wasn't there wasn't actually a law implemented until 1997. And that first year, there were 15 people who used the law. The model in Oregon is a little different. They don't have the setup of having facilitators in the way the state of Washington does. But still, anyway, 290 people used the law in 2019. Washington has had a really strong group advocating for choice around end of life for at least as long as Oregon, perhaps longer, but didn't actually get the law passed until 2008. The first year, 63 people received prescriptions and 36 people used the medication. In 2018, which is the last year that there's data about on the Department of Health website, 267 received prescriptions and 203 actually took the medication. For many people, having the option of having the prescription is the thing that's most important. That's the thing that gives them the sense of knowing that if the burden of living is too great, they have a way to a solution for themselves. This is just to make sure you're still awake. This is my granddaughter and her new puppy. Since Oregon and Washington, a number of other states have passed laws, and many of them are modeled after our law. We modeled our law after Oregon's law. They have many of the same elements in them, that there's a, you have to have a terminal illness, you have to have a 6-month prognosis, you have to have a physician or two certify that you meet those criteria, that you're competent. So they all have the same, pretty much the same elements. There's some minor variations. Not all of them have the system where you have there's no requirement for using End of Life Washington and an advocate in the state of Washington, but the majority of people do. Montana is the sort of outlier in this group, in that it had its Supreme Court ruled that a physician is not prohibited from hastening a terminally ill person's death, but there has never been a law that has been passed to support it, to support that ruling by the Supreme Court. The information is that when you screen, I don't know how many of you believe in polls anymore. All of us have to have a certain amount of skepticism about what information you get from polls these days. But it appears that the significant majority of people in the US believe a person should have the right to hasten their death if they're terminally ill. So then there are a couple of questions about who uses the law and why. And you know, there are, we do know we are lucky that the states are keeping statistics about this stuff, because I think it's important. And one of the things the state of Washington and the state of Oregon agreed that was that if we were going to do this, we wanted to make sure that people weren't being victimized, that there weren't being coerced, that there was they weren't doing it because their symptoms weren't controlled, and to figure out who uses the law. Unfortunately, in our state, I believe that a lot of the people who decide to use the law do so because they have access to it. And on the West Side, there's considerably more access to physicians who are willing to prescribe and to support for using the law. It's also true that when we look at where people want to die in the United States, 80% of people say they want to die at home. In fact, only about 20% of people die at home. If of the people who choose death with dignity, however, 86% do this in their home. 92% are on hospice. Everyone is encouraged to be on hospice because of the different kind of support that hospice gives people, and the emphasis on being sure that symptoms are controlled as best as they can be. The age range of people using the law in 2018 was 28 years old to 98. 86% were on the West Side, 96% were white, 44% were married, 70% had some college. I think on this side of the mountains, we've seen some more variety in the kind of people who come to us, but anyway, the kinds of diseases that that people have, 75% of the people have cancer, 10% have a neurodegenerative disease other than dementia. That's something like ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Then there are people with other chronic illnesses, like my person with chronic lung disease, or we recently had somebody with congestive heart failure. Having insurance does not appear to be a major motivator for, a major motivator for why people use the law. Hugely important is that sense of autonomy, people having a sense of control. You have very little control when you're dying. It's not a good feeling. And that loss of autonomy is a big motivator. Loss of quality of life. People don't have one reason, they usually often have many. Loss of dignity. And concerns about being a burden to others. I think most hospices and caregivers try hard to address all of these issues, and try hard to help people find quality in their life and to treat them with dignity. But there are many things about end stage of a disease that takes these things away from you. So Loretta's going to talk a bit about how the law works.
So the way I'd like to proceed with this is two caveats. I'm not an attorney, as you know. And this is going to be a sort of general couple of slides. there's more depth to once you get into the paperwork. Our intent today is to not get too into those details, but to also have you understand that that is a significant piece of what VCAs do help families and clients do, is walk through the administrative details, in addition to providing emotional support and whatever kind of support. Sometimes, though COVID is changing this, being present at someone's death is a large part of this work. So this is the criteria that every person seeking to invoke and use this law requires. This is listed in the actual code. So I'll let you read it. And if anybody, I think this is pretty self-evident. If anybody has any questions about this slide, I'll hang out for a couple
I
of seconds.
actually have a question. Loretta,
Jen.
how do people need to confirm their residency in Washington State? Do you know?
I don't know. And that was the other thing. I won't necessarily know the answer to all of your questions.
Right.
Confirming your residency, I'm not sure. I think that's pretty standard stuff. You get
Yeah.
a driver's license and you have to have an address, whatever the standard way. And different states, I do know, have different requirements. You might have to be here for 6 months or a year.
Uh-huh.
And Janice, I'm glad you bring that up, because it speaks to the need to prepare. You can't just show up in the state and say, I want to do this. So the law is designed, as we'll get into, slowing down the process. It is designed, it has breaks in it. Oop, click to exit full screen.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Anyway, so that's my non-answer answer to that question. Sorry, I don't know the
That's
answer
good.
to how long. But
Loretta,
hello.
this is Dave. I'm interested in, are you mentally capable of making the decision if you have dementia? Who is the one making the decision of your mental capabilities?
I'm really glad you asked that question. We could do an entire, well, maybe we should at some point do an entire piece about that. Currently in this state, this will be a slight veer off. This would relate to the competency piece. Are you mentally capable of making this decision, which involves two physicians meeting with you in specific ways, and then both agreeing that you are mentally capable, i.e. competent. If you have a diagnosis of dementia in this state, you may not use this law. At this point, there are some excellent resources on the End of Life Washington website that I actually have in my hand here. There are efforts to advance, and Dave, I'd love to talk to you about this later in detail. There are efforts, there's a document, it's a 2-page document, I have it right here, and it's called Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia, Maintaining Dignity and Control at the End of Life. And it walks you through ways that you can anticipate legally helping yourself and make the decision to anticipate your desires when that happens, when it becomes necessary for you to give up the reins. Does that make any sense? Did that
Yes,
answer your
that's the
question?
answer I was looking for. Yep.
Yeah,
thanks.
I have, there's actually some, I'm so impressed with this documentation. I'd really like to share it with you. We can talk about it later and I can direct you to it.
Great.
I think we can go to the next slide if everybody is happy about that. So this slide is somewhat about the mechanics of the law. Once again, End of Life Washington website has incredibly excellent documentation for free for anybody to read. So the first thing you really need to do is decide you're going to explore it. And so you've got a terminal illness, you've met competency, you think you're competent, you want to use this law, you approach your physician, your primary care physician, or the primary physician that is working with you. Could be an oncologist, could be your primary care physician. You have a conversation with that physician and you say, I would like to use this law. And there's a process. It's a very specific process. This is called your first oral request. Your physician doesn't have to agree to help you through this process, but what they can do and need to do is actually record in your chart that on that day and in that time, you are requesting and informing the physician that you are interested. That sets a timeline up. So from that time, there's a 15-day waiting period. There are several things that you'll be busy doing, and likely if you're a person who is in a disease process, you may have a family member who is actually advocating and doing this legwork for you. It could be a VCA, that's what we are. We encourage people to do as much of this as they can and seek the two physicians necessary. One will be the prescribing doctor, and the other doctor we call the consulting physician, who you will see and they will meet and determine your competency. Sorry, meet over the phone. So this is the how the law works piece that gets a little more detailed and confusing. But the takeaway piece is that for this meeting here, and anybody jump in, there's a mandatory waiting day that's part of the law. That's very important. It served as a governor and a protection, because often people approach late and they're in a hurry. And this needs to not be hurried. In our area, we frequently have difficulty finding supportive physicians who participate. So we have barriers here that perhaps the West Side does not. So we have few physicians who are knowledgeable enough and willing to participate. But they don't actually have to participate. They just need to take that first oral request. Often at this point, the client will have already contacted End of Life Washington for guidance. We will avail them of all of these details. We will partner with them and walk them through this process. So at that point, we'll move to the next, the role of the attending and consulting. The two physicians, we call one the attending. They're the ones that's the physician that will be the prescribing physician for the life-ending medication if you choose to use it. And the consulting physician is that secondary physician who will meet with the client and then concur or not with the attending physician about the client meeting criteria. After that happens, that's attached to the 15-day waiting period. The written request for medication, if somebody decides to go ahead and do that, will be filled out. There's a form, don't worry about it. We will help you get there. The next piece of it is, in our area, pretty simple. There is not much choice about choosing a pharmacy for us here. It needs to be a certain type of pharmacy. Some of you may have heard of the term compounding pharmacy. So the pharmacy that we work with, we hope that eventually there'll be more, but in our area, it is when there's a second oral request that is required of the client. And is somebody asking a question? Oh, I heard somebody, sorry.
Couldn't, or I couldn't hear what the pharmacy you said we could use was.
We're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, okay. We only have one pharmacy that's supportive that we work with in this area. That could always change, that Hope Springs Eternal.
Actually, I think the problem is we only have one compounding
Yes,
pharmacy.
in Wenatchee.
That's in Wenatchee, right?
Did that all get broken up from when I said that? Sorry.
Yes.
There are several other pharmacies that have been willing to be participants, but they aren't compounding pharmacies, so they can't.
Yeah, it needs to be a compounding pharmacy. There's a second oral request that comes, in this period of time. And I'm specifically not getting too detailed about this for the purpose of this talk. So the point to take home is that it is a process. If somebody decides to actually go ahead and fill the prescription, we do recommend that you don't fill the prescription until you have a date and a time that you plan to use it. Part of that is cost. Many insurance companies do not cover this, although we also suggest that you inform your insurance company and ask them if they will cover it. I can speak more about the cost and the meds if somebody wants me to, and Betsy can also. That's probably a Betsy piece. We hear our experience in terms of barriers. We do experience physical barrier here has to do with geography. We cover a very wide swath of the Eastern Washington. We all know what winter does here. The pass closes. We've had some pretty creative solutions to get people to medications, to get people to the pharmacy, to figure out who can pick up, will pick up, etc. We have a constant access to providers who are willing to act as attendings and consulting physicians. Cost for some of the clients that we have served has been an issue, given the lack of insurance coverage. Some of you may know about the VM Franciscan merger. Does anybody know about that?
Oh, no.
So Virginia Mason and Franciscan have recently merged, and I know enough. The bottom line is that they are a faith-based organization who have merged with VM, and they will no longer permit their physicians to help people use this law. So that affects I'm not sure of the numbers, but it affects a significant portion of people in this state who could choose to want to use the law if their coverage works through VM.
It's particularly in the southern part of Eastern Washington, so
Okay.
below Wenatchee.
Okay. So the law is overall, at first, it's intended to be slow and methodical. The waiting period is intentional. What we see is people approaching late in their disease process and wanting things. They think they can get the shot or the pill. It doesn't work that way. And I firmly believe that it should not work that way. So the law has barriers in place.
I think there are times when I would really like it to speed up, actually, when people have a need, and it would be nice if it could work more quickly. And there actually is a move in the, to try to give people the option of using, of
you're breaking
sidestepping
up.
some of these barriers in the legislature at the moment. Whether that'll happen or not, I think Loretta's completely right that, you know, the purpose of the delays is to make sure that people are doing something that they clearly want to be doing, and that it's not a decision that's made lightly. But
Yeah, you know, the
and
delay,
I'm sorry, Janice, go ahead.
well, I was
No,
just gonna,
that's
say, the
healthy.
delay becomes problematic because some people actually die before they can get through the whole process. So I think there are a few people that make the decision and they don't have much time left. So that's one of the most common reasons people don't use the drugs that they're eligible for, is that they have a short lifespan.
And I think what we would really like to see is people consider this earlier, so that there isn't that sense of pressure to get through the process at the last minute. So it's really great that all of you are here learning about it before you have any need for it.
I'd like to emphasize, while we're still on how the law works, that there's never, the only time you can decide not to use the meds is after you swallow them. You never have to do this. The thing you do have to do is jump through all these hoops, and you never have to use it. I had a client who had done all of this. She had a primary cancer, and I met her on the last day of her life, and she had done this 4 years before. It was amazing. So the sad part of this to me, I will reemphasize, is when people wait. And I think that has to do with many things, but I think it also has to do primarily with understanding that you never have to use it, and that people don't know about it, and they don't, if you can't use something you don't know about.
This brings us to the next area that Janice is going to discuss with us.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. So I'm going to be talking about talking with doctors, partners, and family. The first thing I would say is, before you talk to anybody, any of those people, you really have to talk to yourself. This is really an important part of the process, which is going inside and figuring out what you want, how you want to die. And there's time for you to ideally gather information, talk to people about it, but not with necessarily you in mind. So you really get a clear understanding of what you want. The clearer you are on what you want, the smoother the process is going to go, the more you're going to get a buy-in from other people like your docs and extended family. Conversations with family and loved ones about the end of your life choices should ideally happen before one gets a terminal diagnosis. Now, don't follow me as that lead. And I found this great line as I was looking up some stuff yesterday. Plan now, die later, do a lot of living and loving in between. And I think that's a good thumbnail for some of what we're saying is going on. And again, ideally, this is not one-time conversation, but it's something that people in the ideal can be, and this is so counter to our culture, but can begin to be something a family talks about, is death and how people want to die and when they want to die, and that they can do that. But our encouraging people to talk about it is really pushing against some of that cultural stuff. And it requires conversations and very direct questions that will help you determine who is comfortable with your choices and how they can support you in the process. So you're paying really close attention to how people are talking to you about death with dignity and your choices. Many authors refer to this period as a very healing opportunity, and an important part of the grieving process is to really be able to talk about your loved ones dying and death in general. And really can open things up. I'm reminding someone I work with way out in very rural Washington. They had a small farm, no running water, very, earthy people, and they had supported the law from the very beginning, and decided she had had cancer again, for a reoccurrence of cancer for a year and a half, and it was time, and she was quite in agreement. What she decided to do was contact her mother, who she'd been estranged from for 20 plus years. And lo and behold, the mother came, and they had an extraordinary reunion with extended family, and it really reverberated through the whole family what that changed, and it wouldn't have happened if she hadn't have made that phone call, and the mother being willing to come out, obviously. Talk to your family and loved ones about where you want to die: hospice, hospital, home. There are choices. What if any kind of artificial life supports you want? What level of pain control do you want at the end? There's all these kinds of choices. And again, our website is really good about having a couple of questionnaires for people to look at and consider a little inane things like, do I want a feeding tube in my mouth or in my belly? I would have never thought of that, but things that really make you dig a little deeper. And there certainly may be people who disagree with your choice. And the clearer you are on your choice, again, the easier it is to get to a point of agreeing to disagree, that they can still be supportive in some way. I'm reminded of a lovely scene I have in my mind. A woman had, again, cancer for about 2 years in excruciating pain. No palliative care could calm the pain. So she was going with death with dignity. And she was in a big master bedroom sleigh bed, huge king size sleigh bed. She was there. Her husband was in the bed with her. Their 2 kids were in the bed with them, and the family dog was in the bed. And they were all saying goodbye. And one of the son and his wife were standing on the outside of that scene. And I knew something was awry, but I didn't know until later. One of the other siblings sort of whispered to me, they weren't comfortable with this choice. Now, the good news is they managed to get there to be there for the event. And I think that meant a lot to the mother, but clearly they were very uncomfortable. And, you wonder if there was more time, more access, would that have gone differently? We'll never know. And then there's talking to your doctors. Here again, don't wait until it's too late to have this really important conversation. An ideal time is when you are giving them copies of your post and having them sign it, or your advanced directive for healthcare. Some doctors may be less receptive to supporting you if you approach them on the heels of getting a terminal diagnosis. They're going to question what your motivation is and look at that, which that's worthwhile. That's worthwhile. But just for you as patient to be able to pay attention to that. And again, as an advocate to your patient. There's something I'm missing here. And here too, you have to use really direct language when you're working with your doctors. Quote, if I were terminally ill and wanted to use the DWD law, would you be willing to write a prescription for life-ending medication? Period. Wait for the pause, the silence, and pay very close attention. Common responses to this question can be, I will help you. Let's talk about that when the time comes. For now, let's focus on treatment. I will be there when the time comes. These are vague answers that aren't going to ultimately instill confidence in the patient, and shouldn't. If your patient has decided to use the DWD law and is at the very beginning of what Loretta was describing, it's important to ask clearly for the medication. So, quote, please document that I have made a first oral request for the ending medication under the Death with Dignity law, unquote. Recently had a client in Okanagan County who granddaughter was attending to the grandmother, and they went to the doctor and had a meeting with him. She left. Both grandmother and granddaughter assumed that that was their first oral request, and the doctor had put it in her medical record. They contacted the doctor a week later wanting more information about how to begin, something they needed. And he said, no, that was not what he understood that meeting to be. So again, it was just really poor communication that really left people sort of up in arms. And if your doctor's not familiar, and ideally you want to be able to work, if you have a long history with your doctor, ideally you would like your doctor to see you through your death too. So if it's just a question of not familiar with DWD, the End of Life Washington medical advisor can contact your doctor and answer any questions, send them packets specifically written up for physicians, and really help them open up possibly to the possibility of helping you. And finally, the short thumbnail, there's lots missing. If you choose to hasten your death, and you do not do this alone, find people who are knowledgeable about DWD or VSED, doctors, friends, and family. And it's right, it's absolutely true what Loretta said, is hospice is a wonderful partner, and just things go so much more smoother if they're involved. And I think that's it. That's all I have.
I might bring up one other thing, which
Okay.
is the affiliation of the physician to a faith-based healthcare organization. And if somebody works within Providence system or the Franciscan system, they cannot be prescribers in their role with that organization. There's a law that was passed this past year that makes it illegal for people not to be they can't have a gag rule enforced, but no physician is required to participate in this law, and no facility is required to participate in the law, and facilities can prohibit their providers from participating. So that is an important thing for you to know if you're part of a bigger system. It also is true that long-term care facilities can have rules about participating in the law. And if you want to have the option of using the law in a long-term care facility, it's important to know what their rules are. Being one of the really hardest parts is that a lot of the people we see are really sick, and to navigate all this stuff, or change where you've been getting your health care or transfer your care to somebody new is a huge deal. It's not a small thing. And End of Life Washington can help find providers for you who will participate. But we really do like to support the physicians in the community who want to participate. So that is always the first choice. Loretta or Janice, do you have anything else you want to say about that?
I just wanted to make sure everybody understood what POLST was. Janice mentioned it, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knew what a POLST was. And Raleigh supplied a very nice succinct answer. But Janice, did you want to
Go ahead.
loop that in? It's the term called physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. It's in different states, it's different colors, it's called different things. In our state, I think it's she says lime green or something. And it tells the medics whether, what you want them to do or not do in detail. It actually is an order from a physician, and we highly recommend it, especially with in all circumstances. But I just wanted to make sure that didn't fly by in case anybody wanted to know what it was. But I wanted to just add one piece from, perhaps this is my nursing perspective. I think often in talking with physicians, people, we hand a lot of control to the physician. And this may be the very first time that you as the client, or the person you're supporting as the client, goes in there and says, I want this. I want this from you. it changes. It's a dynamic that's that's a shift for some people, because the physician as authority is something we all have a relationship, whether it with, which is either comfortable or suspect or whatever. But in this case, you are in no uncertain terms directing your
I think we just lost you, Loretta.
oh,
Oh, there you are again.
oh,
There
sorry.
you are again.
I just stopped talking. That was all I had to say.
Okay. So we should talk for a second about who the law doesn't work for. So you got to, again, it's somebody who has to be terminally ill, has to have a 6-month prognosis, has to be competent. So if you have a dementia and don't have a 6-month prognosis and have lost cognitive and are in cognitive decline, or if you have a chronic terminal illness, which is not expected to take your life within 6 months, or if you're too sick, too weak, too sedated to take the meds yourself, this law doesn't work for you. And then the question is, what are your options? And these are, I don't want to think we have to go through them a lot, but I think it's important to know that there are options. It's not the only, taking life-ending or ending medication to hasten your death is not the only option. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is a very legitimate option. Raleigh had a client, an older woman with chronic intractable pain in her 90s, who ultimately was not viewed as having a terminal illness. And she said, I'm ready, and was offered voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, and had a very gentle and peaceful death, supported by her family and partner, her spouse. And it was seen as a blessing by everyone. It's a different process, and End of Life Washington is getting much, much better at giving people tools to help support them. You don't have to accept treatment. Palliative care is an option. It's a limited option here still, despite Raleigh's work in this area. It's just to try to provide good palliative care in an area in a rural area the size that we cover is challenging. So all of this really supports discussions around advanced care planning, and you're having those conversations with the people important to you around what is important to you in your life, what we value in your life, and what your fears are about death. All those conversations that are really so difficult to have in our culture, but are so enriching and so incredibly, such incredible opportunities to go deeper in how, in what matters to us with those we care about. And we're always looking for more volunteers. On the east side of the Cascades at this point, there are 5 volunteers for End of Life Washington. That includes everything to all the way to Spokane. On the west side of the Cascades, there I think are 58. It's a very different resource in those 2 places. And now I would like to stop sharing that screen and have us, I'd like to go around the circle. The first person I'm going to call on actually is Heather. Is she still here? maybe not. And just go around the room about what your experiences are and what's brought you here to this discussion. So I might start with Barbara, since I'll go around the who I see next on the screen. Maybe we can unmute, you can unmute yourself when we start to talk.
My experience with death started relatively early in my life, with my father dying when I was 15.
I think I'm
but
ready
I-
to.
And as a result,
Okay, well, here's this.
both death and sex were not subjects that were not spoken about in my house, which for growing up in the 60s, that was unheard of. My friends didn't have families that shared quite so much. And I think now with COVID, I think that a lot of people are thinking about death in different ways. And especially the way that the majority of people that are dying in a hospital with COVID are having to experience the horrible endings of their life. So I've always been interested in this subject, and have talked with Betsy and Raleigh when they first started having the discussions. And at that time, one of my questions was, what do the medications taste like? And was told that they were really horrible. So I asked whether mixing them with alcohol or wine, a good wine, might be a benefit. I don't think I ever got an answer.
Well, I'll give you an answer now. The medicine is bitter, and people do mix it with alcohol. I think what it does is sort of poison the alcohol, unfortunately.
So
But
don't taste
oftentimes
it.
people have a little sorbet or something like that as a palate cleanser. So it's not the whole experience isn't as terrible as it might have been.
All right, well, I won't ask that question again.
Heather, are you back? She was back briefly. How about you, Malcolm? Do you want to say anything about what brought you here?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sure. Death with dignity has been a subject of interest for me all my life. I have all too much experience with prolonged, long dragged out death. That is, long, painful, protracted suffering death. 3 siblings and both my parents all experienced that. And it seems to me absolutely dreadful. That's what brought it into focus to me as very important to me. This subject is very important. I live in Vermont, where, my primary home is in Vermont, where there is a similar death with dignity law to Washington's. I've had a whole bunch of wonderful summer times in the Methow Valley, and I'm glad to know that Washington State has a good, effective death with dignity law. And this session today has been very informative in bringing me up to speed on the process. Thank you, Betsy, especially, and the rest of the presenters.
Sharon, you wanna? I think you're muted still.
Okay. Yeah, COVID has really made me rethink, or made me think more about this. And my parents both died within the last 5 or 7 years. And my mother, it was a 4-year process. My dad was much shorter, but it really made me reevaluate, if I'm going to go down the path that they did, how should it be different than what I saw? So I've already had talks with my children, and I've had talks with my doctor, and I have a pulse form. And luckily my children, because they also saw their grandparents, they're accepting of not prolonging things if that's what is possible.
You know, so one of the things about doing these talks is I always feel a little like you're talking to the choir. You guys are the people who are probably the most prepared. And that's terrific. It's enriching for us for sure. But hopefully there is some additional information that's passed on. Well, it is interesting that both End of Life Washington, or many organizations in the palliative care arena, End of Life Washington, have produced documents to support conversations around COVID. And if you go to the End of Life Washington website again, there is a document there. The University of Washington has a palliative care team that also developed documents, and they're to just to promote conversation. Ellen, you want to take a swing?
Sure. I think more than anything, I have a couple questions. The stopping eating and drinking, is that something that is done through hospice, or can you just do it at home with your family?
It really helps to have hospice involved, and we've been fortunate that hospice has been willing to be involved. Because it's helpful to have support with medication.
Okay. And my other question, this planning ahead bit here. So I was confused when Loretta gave a story of someone who had made the plans 4 years ahead of time. Maybe they had been diagnosed terminal and then it moved later. But the whole thing about getting a PLST now based on my advanced directive, and that when you're with something like Confluence Health, you don't necessarily have a doctor, and if you do, it could be someone different later on. So the more details, not necessarily now, on all the ways you plan ahead.
Well, those are really good questions.
Excellent questions.
Confluence does keep your advanced directive in your chart. Now, whether it's truly available or not, at the time when you need it most, who knows? Polls are usually discussed there. It's interesting, Sharon, that you've already gotten yours, because lots of physicians are reluctant to help people complete those unless they do have some significant illness in their life. There's no reason you have to have a major illness. What you have to have is clarity around not wanting to be resuscitated if the emergency medical team shows up at your door, or you have a major car accident and you don't want to be resuscitated in that situation. So the pulse gives you options, but you're not going to have the pulse in the car probably.
So I get the pulse from my current doctor, and then I will assure you that I did turn in my advanced directive, and Confluence assures me that it's scanned in. But when I go to ask for the documents, it says they're not there. And so I had a discussion with them probably a year ago, and they said, oh, we didn't know that, we'll work on it. And the lady got back to me and said, it's a third party and we know we have yours. So, but they never could have that check mark that I could be assured they had it. It was just
well, I have a source that can help me get some information on that. So I'll try to get back to you about that.
I am comforted that I know they have it. I just am not necessarily comforted that anyone would look at it, but yeah.
So Ellen, you bring up two really salient points regarding advanced care planning. Those advanced directives, while you have the option, while you're not dealing with an illness, it's often recommended that you review them in detail each year at a minimum, or when you have a significant life change, while you have the time to muse. all of our circumstances can change. And number two, while I'm thrilled that you feel assurance that those advanced directives are in the system and could be produced on as a former ER person, it is still common for people to come in distressed conditions, and the chart is we're supposed to look for those exact plans that you would like us to execute, and it's not always smooth. So I think, work with Betsy to make sure those things are front and center.
And I have to say, more importantly, is having the conversation and the document with the person who's your decision maker. And that's really, really key. You all have been really patient, and if we go another 15 minutes, are you willing? Or is that, anybody can leave at any time, obviously, but that would be 4 o'clock. We're over time already. Frauke, do you want to say why you're here?
Sure. I think as Barbara, this time of COVID has certainly made me think more about death, as well as losing our daughter very suddenly 6 months ago. I have had, my sister was very involved in lobbying for the law back in 1998. And I know several people who have been able to use the death with dignity law and have had some as beautiful a death can be when we're losing somebody. But I think it's very important to be able to make those choices. And I thank all of you for shedding so much light on the law and what we need to do. And yeah, so thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Carlin and Dave, you want to say anything?
There.
That me?
Well, you're soon. You're coming, Dave. This is a different Dave.
I'm Carolyn Gunderson. This is Dave Dunn, my husband. I have long-standing multiple sclerosis, which is a neurodegenerative disease, and I have learned now that this law won't really apply to me, but I do have another option, which is the voluntary cessation of nutrition and water. And I am thrilled with that. And I just feel so grateful for this information, because MS doesn't usually kill directly. It can be a very long, slow process. And I would like to have that choice instead of just lingering forever, being a burden, and just continuing to just slowly decline. That would be horrible for not just me, but for the people I love. So this has been really helpful for me, and I'm very grateful. Thank you, all of you.
Sarah, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. I'm not from Washington. My name is Sarah Walker. I live in Idaho, and we don't have a death with dignity law. This year with COVID, and I got revved up on advanced care planning, and especially with the help of Methou at Home and you, Dr. Weiss, and the sessions that you've had on it really helped me talk to family members, and which I thought was the hard part. So I'm interested in death with dignity law in a general way, doesn't apply to me, but at least at this point. So thank you for all the information.
Jen?
Yeah, I'm the nurse at Jamie's Place, so I wanted to hear about this both personally and professionally. I want to have no information, obviously, to give my patients or their families if that comes up, and to be able to work closer with hospice. Also, my mom has pretty advanced Alzheimer's, and my grandmother did. So I want to know what my options are going down the road, because I feel a high likelihood of having that disease.
Dave Ford?
Well, I have the same fear of dementia like the most recent one, because my grandfather died of Parkinson's disease and my mother died 2 weeks ago at 96 with dementia. And she decided to quit eating and drinking for 3 days, and that finished her, I guess, as her will. But it's hard to tell when both she and her husband, my dad, has even worse dementia of Alzheimer's. And so they can't really, help out with each other. Do they really want to keep going, and what to do about it? But it was real interesting listening to some of the comments about, at a later stage of dementia, if I came to witness it, when my mother was incontinent, and just watching her 10 years ago being, or 8 years ago being embarrassed by that, but later on in dementia, it didn't seem like it mattered at all, or, that's what it appeared when you watched. So I just don't know what their quality of life really was or is. And my dad at 94 is, you really can't tell. He hasn't known who I am, that I can tell, for probably 5 years. But they stayed alive together because their whole thing was they, cared so much about each other that well, what will the other person do if I died? They just seem to stay alive, because what would the other person do? But to me, it didn't look like a quality of life that I would choose for myself. That's why my question of who decides who's of sound mind, because they're obviously not to me. And, so that's why I was on board today.
Dave, you raised some really fascinating issues. And one thing that I think may not have been possible for you with your parents, but may be possible for us and ourselves, is making sure that we talk to the people who we care about what we want before we get there. And that's why some of these documents, like the advanced care document from End of Life Washington for someone with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease, is so helpful, is it gives you something to work from that will allow you to have that conversation, a sort of structured conversation with the person who you designate as your decision maker. And your parents may not have had those documents. They may have not had, they may have chosen one another as the decision makers. At this point, since it sounds like your dad is not competent, you may be the decision maker for him. But if he hasn't elected to share his feelings about life with you, it puts an incredible burden on you to try to make those decisions. That's why the anticipatory conversation is of such incredible value. I mean, to be the person who's deciding for a parent. I mean, I was blessed having my mother tell me what she wanted long before she got to the point where she was losing her mind. And we had ongoing conversations about it as she lost her mind. And but that was, she made it very clear that she did not want to live without being able to be an autonomous, independent person. So when she broke her hip, it was easy to have a conversation with her about whether she wanted to wanted to go to the hospital. And I said, we're thinking about not having you go to the hospital. And she said, oh, good. And then I said, that may mean that you will die more quickly. And she said, oh, that. She'd lost her husband, my father. She, the quality of her life was not great. And, I wouldn't say that I'm without sadness and even some, did I do the right thing? But I know she was comfortable in our home. But she gave me that gift, that she took that burden from me by letting me know long ahead of time what she wanted. And we can do that for those we love as well. But I'm sorry about your mother. I mean, no matter how right or good it is that she died, it is a loss.
Yeah, it's just tough because the part about I had all the directives and I'm the one that's pulling the plug and basically have been the one in charge of everything for their last 10 years or so with power of attorney and everything, but it's all complicated in their Seventh-day Adventists, and it's their religious background that don't allow anything, such as what we're talking about to even happen in their minds. So I kind of know that they don't want to go that way, but it just, I just have to go with their wishes, even though that's not what I would choose for myself.
Well, that's right. That is, and it's hard sometimes. Patty, you shared thank you, Dave, for sharing that. Patty, you shared with us some important information in the chats. Do you have anything more you want to say? You're muted right now.
Unfortunately, I can't unmute.
Yeah, she may not have anything else that you want. And I think Val, it may be the other person, and
I think Val's not here anymore.
I'm not sure who the other telephone number is. Val reminded us that if you have a post form, it needs to be on your refrigerator, so that emergency people can. Oh, that's Eric. I think emergency people can find it. Eric, do you have anything to say?
That was my. You just stated my concern of this whole thing is. I've seen people have long drawn out deaths, and I want to avoid that for myself and for my loved ones. And I have a pulse, and I've got it on the fridge, but I'm very skeptical that when the EMTs come to resuscitate me, they're even going to look. They're just going to immediately, their adrenaline's going to be going, and then they're just going to, oh, he's on the floor, resuscitate him. So I don't know how to make, if you put it on, tattoo it on my face or something. I don't know how to really get it so that I know that they won't resuscitate me.
So go ahead. You're ready to speak. Loretta.
I would like to speak to that sense of a lack of control I can honestly tell you, are there any other first responders still here? No? I'm going to speak up for them. If they're very trained to look for that lime green, bright orange piece of paper on your refrigerator, they will honor it. I think they absolutely are trained to honor it. I can't say that, it happens in every single case, but it's your best defense. If it weren't there, they couldn't know. And honestly, I want to reassure you that if that post is there, they will not make their own decisions. They're very, very, very used to these documents. And when I saw, who is it, Val Hecker, as a retired first responder, having access to a post is critical. We used to advance that notion to people who weren't sick at all, or who definitely were sick or had an illness, as a comfort. It's been around a long time in some form, in some state, in every state or in many states. And it really does help them out. They want to know that they can respect your wishes, whatever they are. So I don't know how to
tell you that in this community, they're very tuned into it. The Arrow Meadow is very much tuned into looking for your information on your refrigerator.
And to reiterate, they have to do CPR if you don't have one. If you do not have a directive, they have to do life-sustaining. It may not be CPR, it may be other life-sustaining measures that are invasive.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all
No,
the
thank
presenters. Thanks for this conversation. It's enlivening counterintuitively.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Betsy, I have a question. I
Okay.
think in Oregon, the law is a little different and there's more support if you have dementia.
That may be true. I'm not, they don't have a system of the volunteer system that Washington has. I didn't think that that covered dementia. I mean, I'm pretty sure you have to be competent to use the law.
Yeah, I want to say if you go in there early enough to a physician that you can have that option for yourself.
I should clarify that, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it was. It may have been changed. Are either Janice or Loretta, do either of you look at that recently?
Oh, Loretta, you're muted. You guys are both muted.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I've always assumed not, just because I assumed it was like Washington that way, but I don't know definitively.
I think it used certainly.
That's worth knowing, though.
Yeah, we should check that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting, just to have a conversation around dementia and
Life, and I think I agree with you. Very interesting. Brings up a lot.
yeah, it's such a hard one.
Mhm.
So good to see you, Dave and Carlin.
I know, you're great. Thank you for coming.
All right. Okay, well, Betsy, I'll see you mañana on the Zoom again.
Zoom girls.
Sorry.
Nice meeting you. Take care.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Loretta, you must be stuck on mute, I guess. All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to end the meeting. Bye.